Well, I'm here, but apparently my camera is not, so just give me a minute and I will fix that. Hopefully, there we go. And I guess we'll find out whether the other camera has done the same thing. Also, I feel like it's tilted a little, but there we go. I see Kiriniko is here, and Clavicus, and Quindy, Beguiler87. Thank you all for joining me. Let's see. So I'm going to be going back to my repainting of my first completed miniature. I'm working on 3 different versions, though. So hopefully we'll have some fun with that. But I am just going to warn everyone, I had to take one of those, do not operate heavy machinery medications. So if I fall asleep or this stream goes a little weird, that's what that is. So you can take bets on that, which one's more likely to happen, that I will fall asleep or go weird. Actually, I'll come back to this view for just a minute. So for today, I'm going to be using the colors from the first 2 Learn to Paint kits from Reaper. So that's Learn to Paint Core Skills and Learn to Paint Level Up. And those colors are all available individually, and you can see online what they are. But also, recently, when I went to Reaper, I got to get these. So I've added these to my stream set. So these are... do it like that. These are expansions for each of the Learn to Paint kits to add colors. So if you just have core skills, you probably notice there isn't a red and there isn't a skin tone. So the core skills expansion set has both of those things. And then likewise, there are holes in the layer up, and this fills those. And then if you get everything, you have... what did I count? So it's 22 plus 16, which I believe adds up to 38. So I have a set of 38 colors, which I feel probably simulates the kind of thing that someone who's fairly new to painting or has a fairly conservative budget would have. And those also, then I have a variety of colors, because sometimes questions will come up in the chat. And if I only have the colors I plan to work on that day, then I don't have something to demonstrate with when people ask questions. So this way, I'm going to always have those, even if I'm working on a specific color scheme, so that I can answer questions. All right, so the guys that I'm working on are the Anurian Swords men. I have multiple of them. Sorry, it just seemed like my light got dimmer, but it's probably because it's a rainy day. And this is actually the guy that was in the very first series of Reaper Learn to Paint kits. So there's the number in case you want to get some of these. Because these are like great, and there's different Anurians as well, but they're great like town guards or merchant train guards or that kind of thing if you need some of those for your game. So this was painted. This is my first completed miniature, which before anyone is like, oh my gosh, mine is so much more horrible. This took me 8 hours, so let's bear that in mind. Plus I had studied some additional resources. So just keep that in mind. And then this was my second guy, which again, I knew from the beginning that I was interested in display painting, so I was fine taking a long time painting miniatures and trying to improve them instead of trying to paint a bunch for a game. We weren't playing a game at the time. But one of the reasons I picked up the hobby of miniatures painting was that if we did start playing a game, we could have cool guys. And I have painted for our game. I wasn't painting these guys specifically. I suspect these Anurians will go in the box of dudes for our game. But I saw this guy on my shelf when I was picking up the others. And I thought it would be interesting to ask you kind of which one of these you like. Oh my. So this is not a Reaper miniature. This is old school Ralpartha Grenadier type stuff, which is why he is so much shorter than these other fellows. But I don't necessarily get as upset about the scale thing as other people, because if you look at real people, there are extremes. If you know Erin Corporea, if you've met her at ReaperCon, she is a pretty short person. And there are also some, if you've seen Gene the sculptor, he's a very tall person. If you put the two of them side by side together, it would probably look something like this. So I'm okay with some variations in scale. I mean, there are times you're doing a diorama or something where it looks weird, but overall I'm okay. But I'm just curious kind of which one of these overall you like better. Because I think my answer sort of surprised me. So that's those guys. And I'll start getting my paint stuff out. Well, I'll just leave them here in the frame for now, actually. Even though he won't be quite standing up straight because of his little holder. So I got my palette. Got my sponge. So for those who are new here, I like to use a damp sponge, which looks ridiculously large there. We'll put it over here. To wick my brush, or if I have like a lot of paint on my brush and I need to get some of it off, I use a damp sponge. I believe, and if you watch her show, has talked about using damp paper towel. Michael Proctor uses damp paper towel. Oh, I see why it looks dark, because I accidentally turned that light off. I just like the sponge. I think it's nice on the brush bristles. It's reusable. Not forever. Eventually it does kind of get caked up a bit with the acrylic paints, just like that. Let's see. Casmania. You mean like better paint job or figure sculpt? Paint job. So just in terms of the painting. And I'll swirl them around again since my miniature light wasn't on at the time. Then I have another question from Valander. How do you transport your figures? My D&D game is starting to meet in person again after over 2 years as of this coming Wednesday. If you look on my blog, there is a post about transporting miniatures. There's also one of these shows that was about that. The post will link to it because I don't... The numbering scheme on YouTube isn't correct. There was one that got doubled. And then some had titles instead of numbers. So I can't easily recommend... I can't say it's YouTube video number blah blah. But the post, which is about transporting figures for a variety of different purposes, so display figures, army figures, game figures, includes pictures of different options, the kind of pros and cons. So that's going to be a way more thorough answer than I can give you now, because I did a whole show on that where I showed the options and stuff. But if you find the blog post, it will link to, and it should be in the table of contents. The table of contents, admittedly, is not up to date, but those were from before I fell behind that episode. Quindy needs to go fix those now that I'm done with fixing Anne's 500 episodes. There are also, I think there are a few that it's like part 1 and part 2 because there were Twitch problems. But yeah, if you fix those, that would be amazing. I have my own, it's numbers in Mac. It's Excel. I have like a spreadsheet, and I think I numbered them correctly. But I don't, well, let's see actually, because I have one. I had one that I printed out before. So ReaperCon Travel Tips might be that one. And that's from early November 2021. Yeah, that seems like it's probably it. So if you look for videos that were uploaded in early November or mid-November, you should be able to find that video. There may be slightly different information in the blog post because when you write, there's kind of different things than when you do videos. So let's see. Casmania likes the Reaper one. It has more subtle shading. And I agree, but I also think the shading is too subtle. So I think this guy doesn't have enough contrast. And that although the technique isn't as adept on this, being my second miniature and all, going for the contrast overall, particularly if we're talking about, miniatures that we're going to look at on the table, packs more punch and is more useful. So if I start doing this, which one do you like better? And this guy starts losing some of his punch. So he's all subtlety. Now, I can do both of those things now. I couldn't at the time. But I think I did spend too many years chasing smoothness and not paying enough attention to the value of contrast and dealing with color schemes and stuff like that. So I thought it would be interesting to bring him along as well. Now the metallic method on this is a little bit different. Like it's shiny all the way, so it does have shading, but it's shading with inks so that it's shinier. So it's a different kind of method. I think I like the shaded metallics like Anne and Michael do, where you use matte paints for the shadows. I like that a little better because you're controlling reflections. But I have been dealing with metallics since this first one that was finished was metallics. And I didn't get like super far last time. I did skin, and I gave one of them a more orange skin tone and one of them a more pink skin tone. And then I started the dry brushing and working on the armor panels here. And what was I thinking for this guy? So my third guy, I think I actually want to maybe try non-metallic metal on it. Like just, quickie non-metallic metal, not spend your whole life doing it non-metallic metal. But we'll see. I think I felt like the chainmail didn't get highlighted enough in some parts on this one. It seems darker than this. I think that's partly just because I haven't put the blue on. But also you see there's more definition around those armor plates. So I had painted everything black first, like this guy, and then just painted the steel color on the tops of things, and I left those lines. I mean, another way would be you could paint everything steel and then put the lines in later. But I think this shows the value. Like, there's more detail on this sculpt than is apparent. And the lining, which I know is one of those things that some people don't like to do, but I hope this is making a persuasive argument for the value of lining and for adding a little more shading. And I almost feel like this guy could have more shading, but he doesn't have enough plates to really go to town on shading. So the first thing I want to do, and this allows, I'll be able to swap between these guys while paint is drying, because last week we certainly experienced the pain of waiting for paint to dry. So in addition to my colors from all the kits, I am permitting myself to use blue liner and a couple highlight colors I like. It won't be hugely different from using black, if that is all you have. Eat to Surf says it's also a reason to prime some models in black. Quindy found the blog post on transporting minis, which is cleverly titled How to Transport Miniatures. So if you just go to my blog and search for transport miniatures, it should come up as well. I'm saying that for the benefit of people watching on YouTube, because I realize now that the people watching on YouTube do not have all the awesomeness that Quindy provides us in chat here on Twitch. So, is he staying in focus? I want this guy to have some darker area. This is going to be a non-metallic metal one. But I am going to have to do like last week when I was showing you side brushing. So I'll have another opportunity to show you side brushing if you missed last week. I want to get some of those shadows a little darker, shadow areas, because I won't be able to do it after doing the side brushing very easily. So I'm not bothering about the plates, because that I'm going to handle in the more traditional fashion. And here I find a place that I missed completely. So good thing I'm doing this. But just to bring out the form a little more. So for priming, well, first of all, I don't prime Bones Miniatures. I'm thinking that I might experiment with priming Bones USA. I suspect that they would benefit from it, and my understanding is that they're fine with it. But Bones Black and Bones Original spray primers are bad to use on them. Some people get lucky and it works for them, but a lot of people don't. So I just have taken a hard tack of don't use spray products on classic and Bones Black figures. So I don't usually prime them. If I really care, I will airbrush, a universal color on, and I'd probably just pick whatever there is the most of on the figure. In terms of black, white, and gray, a lot of it is personal preference. if you're painting brighter colors, so you plan on painting reds and oranges and yellows, starting with black is making your life harder. Starting with white is probably going to make your life easier. If you are painting, like if it's a guy that's mostly metal, yeah, starting with black makes sense. If it's mostly dark colors or the figure has a lot of black on it, starting with black makes sense. In my opinion, whatever color you start with, if you put enough base coats on of the other color you want, the primer doesn't make any difference. So I usually split the difference and prime gray. So I was happy when Reaper switched all the miniatures to gray, because it's how I prime, and it works so much better. Like I took him away because I had one of the original white Sir 4 scales, and I picked up one of the gray ones when I was at Reaper because it just glares out on video. So whenever I would do video stuff like this or other video things, I would have to paint my bone stuff gray for you guys to be able to see it well. So I'm happy not to have to do that. But yeah, in the Cult of Primer, I'm other than don't spray prime bone stuff, I'm pretty agnostic, I guess. Or you could say it reflects my indecisive personality that I went ahead and went with gray as my preferred primer. All right, so I'm going to do the chainmail on this guy, and I think I might do it more classic dry brushing than... I don't know, I do like side brushing, but just for fun. Maybe I'll use one of these, makeup style brushes and have a little more control. This has, because it's short bristles and it's a flattened shape, they tend to be less wobbly. So if you look at that, like I have to push it quite a bit and compare it to a longer round brush, those bristles are way more flexible. So for some tasks, this is handy, and I think for this dry brushing of the thing, it will help. Eat to Surf is a gray guy myself, but I did some priming, first coating in black on some plate guys, and the plates really popped just like you showed. Yeah, for plate mail, if you have the brush control to not paint into the crevices, painting black is really useful for that, because it's like you don't have to go back and do lining. And if we just look at this guy, so I could fix this guy. I'm not going to. I mean, he's archival, sort of. Like I will sometimes mess with old miniatures, if it's been like 4 months or 6 months since I painted it, I'm like, oh, look at those problems. But stuff that I've done in classes and something like this, like I want to remember. That's one of the reasons I'm doing this exercise. If you have been feeling bad about your painting, grab something similar, the same or similar to one of the first miniatures you painted and paint it now, and I bet you're going to feel better about your painting. So I've been doing variations of the same thing recently, but I thought it would be fun to, go back in time and get something older and paint that. And just there's no wash I could do that would make the rivets pop like that unless I'm getting rid of so much of the silver that I'm essentially layering up over the silver, and why did I do a wash? So in my opinion, washes cannot make up for lining or even as much shading as you really need to have on things. I'm just looking for a paper towel to use for the dry brushing, but it is white, so it probably will mess up the frame, so I'm going to keep that out of frame. If someone wants to see how I am unloading the brush, which is a totally valid thing to want to see, just let me know and I will do that. But we had a couple of kind of dry brush focus episodes on this show, and those are also in the archive where I was testing different brushes. This isn't one of the brushes I tested. I think I tested something like this that was bigger. So this is blade steel that I'm putting over it. And if there was a slightly darker metallic color in the kits, I might use that. And then work out more highlights, but there's not, which is fine. Because I can also, do some shadows. with thin down paint. You know, selective washes, I think, is what I've been calling them, to try and not scare people who are afraid of layering. I think that that is a great way to start layering. Although it's interesting, some people have more trouble going dark with layering. Like, so, you know, painting in shadows, they'll find that they can't get as smooth or attractive as they want, and some people have more trouble with highlights. Back in the day, I think for skin, what I used to do, particularly for female characters and like elves and other characters that you want them to have smoother transitions on their skin. Like, if you look at this guy, he's got some pretty significant sculpted lines on his face. You don't have to be as subtle with that kind of thing. With characters that are, you know, monsters, men, older characters, you can kind of go nuts with those expression lines, and typically it just makes them look better and more interesting. But for the ones you want to have smooth, I did have trouble with shading in the beginning. So I would do I'd start a little bit darker than, you know, what I wanted is the mid-tone, and then I'd do a glaze with a darker color for the shadows, and then just do layering up. It wasn't enough contrast, but it was for what I was painting at the time, I guess. Oh, he's not on with the tape. He might have to get put on with the tape, because he seems a little... Are any of them on with the tape? No. All right. Well, maybe the blue tack. Michael finally convinced me to use his blue tack, and I admit it is pretty good. I might have to get a round brush, just because some of these places are very small and hard to reach. I think he's going to end up with a little bit of brighter armor than the other guy, which is kind of what I want. I'm going to use if I remember, I use a separate container for metallics so that I don't get little shiny flakes in my... And if I also remember, I use a separate paper towel so I don't get... Or I use the paper towel instead of my sponge. Metallic flakes in my things that I don't want to be metallic flaky. Eat, serve, too. Good point. Like a sketchbook, it shows progress. Yes, I think it's very important. I know there are sometimes people who they'll strip a mini and start again, and strip a mini and start again, and strip a mini and start again. You never give yourself anything to measure against if you're constantly restarting stuff or, you know, revising things that you did in the past. And I think it's very helpful to be able to look back on things you've done. And sometimes you'll rediscover stuff. Like, if I had more energy today, I was thinking about, instead of going back to these guys, taking a break from this and working, you know, doing some sculpting, doing some base sculpting. Because I'm looking back at past figures that I've done, not these ones, because I didn't bring those ones, but because these ones have very basic bases. But other past figures that I've done, and realizing that I was more adventuresome, and I wouldn't ever say that I've been super adventuresome about basing, but I did more basing than I've been doing for years now, because I've had a lot of, you got to paint this quick, or I'm just too tired, or a variety of other reasons why I haven't been doing basing on miniatures. And I'm always talking to you guys about being more courageous and accepting that you're going to make mistakes, and that's just part of the process. And basing seems to be an area where I need to take my own advice. So I thought it'd be good to do that on camera, but today just ended up not being the day for that. And I may have to do a little bit before I'm on camera again, but I may still try to do some of that, because we haven't done a lot of that on here. I've worked a little bit with putty and done some stuff, but we haven't done a lot. I think I should do a bit more for you guys. Well, you all. I'm from an era where guys was a generic term that did not refer to gender. But I realize that we no longer live in this world, and I try to moderate my speech accordingly, but that doesn't always happen. So I'm going to get a nicer brush now and do the edging. And we did talk about the edging last week. Am I going to get a nicer brush? I keep losing it. So the way edging works is, let's zoom in just a little. Instead of using the pointy tip of the brush or the side tip, which I think is what we paint a lot of stuff with, you use the texture or shapes on the miniature and the side of the brush. So you're essentially pulling the paint off of the brush with the miniature. So if I wanted to make a nice shiny edge on the sword, which I will when we get there, I would do this. So it's essentially like a cross pattern. And that's similar to when I was talking about doing side brushing for that. But I'm going to be trying to do it on the edges of these plates. There's going to be some using the tip because honestly the edges aren't sticking out that much. The edges of cloaks are another place where that's handy. Let's find somebody with a nose. All these guys have armor things over their nose. I've used it to highlight the nose. So, well, I'm going to have to, because her arm is up like that, I'm going to have to do it like this. So you pull down towards the end of the nose where you want the brightest highlight, where the nose is sticking out the most from the face. So instead of trying to make a very precise little dot with the tip of your brush, you're using the side of the brush and pulling the paint down. And then if you're doing multiple layers of highlights, because that should be a pretty bright spot on the face, so I will typically apply a few levels of highlights there, you just start a little further down on the next one. So we have an advantage over trying to paint on paper because we have these shapes on the figure that we can use to our advantage and do stuff like that. I feel like I didn't bring these little edges out as much as I would have liked on the other one, so we'll try on this guy. One reason, because I agree with Each Who Surf. Why strip a mini when you can buy more? So rather than paint flowing out of the brush, it's kind of like dry brushing. It is kind of like dry brushing. You don't want to have as little paint on the brush as dry brushing. So you don't want to have a big clump like this. But you just want to get enough off that there's, a controlled amount of paint. You can see there's still plenty of silver in there. I just, I'll do it again here. So I have my clump, and then because this is a round brush, I'm rotating it slightly as I'm getting the paint off. I'm just getting the excess. I'm not trying to, scrub until there's a lot of paint off. And then here I will just go ahead and do it on the edge of the sword to demonstrate. And if you're sculpted, see, there's no paint on the face of either of those blades. So if I was trying to do a white highlight, which I would probably do at least part of this area white when I get to the non-metallic metal guy, that's how I would make sure that I'm not slipping. Because if I'm trying to do that with the tip of my brush, yeah, I'm going to slide down and hit those faces. It doesn't work everywhere that you might want it to work, but it can help a lot. And it can sometimes add a little pop to things too. It's kind of like the highlight version of lining. So you can take a figure where you haven't spent a ton of time doing highlighting and add a little pop to it by adding some edging. In fact, I believe traditional, Games Workshop, White Dwarf, the old school articles, a lot of it was you're doing edging and lining to make your minis pop on the tabletop. So I don't know if you all find this, but I find that metallic paints start to goo up on my... Do you hold the brush and move the mini into the edge? No. So one thing that is helpful, every now and then I'll have to move a miniature. But so you see the miniature staying solid, I'm pulling the brush down. Wherever possible, you want to keep the miniature, like move the miniature so that you can do what you want, and keep your brush hand making very similar motions. You're building muscle memory like an athlete. So if I'm doing this, and this is one reason that I don't have, yeah, I do have a guide that's on, I think. This is one reason I put the miniatures on these. And that's a strong recommendation for most painters I know, is to put the miniature on some kind of holder, because this is very awkward and it's more likely to lead to, like, I don't want to be doing something like this to highlight this. Just turn the guy around. I can highlight this with the side of the brush. So as much as possible, you want to be able to use the brush in the same kind of motions, and the better you get at making those motions, that's brush control. That's the thing where you're getting the paint to go where you want it. And you will build it faster if you're moving the miniature to reach places instead of moving the brush. But I was saying, I'm having to get new blade steel because I find that even on a wet palette, my metallics goop up really quick. So I prefer to put out just a small amount and then just accept that, 10 or 15 minutes later, I will be putting out more. Also, if you were here when I was doing my giant paint maintenance swatch adventure, as I expected, the paints I had the most problems with being irreparable or needing a lot of tender loving care, because I had not done my paint maintenance in as timely a fashion as I should have. It was metallics. I did lose probably a dozen metallics. I think I lost one or two regular colors. Now, bear in mind, this is out of 800 or 900 paints. So even for not having done my maintenance very well, Reaper paint lasts a good long time. But I do recommend once a year or every other year, go through your paints, pop that little dropper tip off, and double check that there's not a bunch of paint gunked up in the dropper bit, and also weather the paint. Because sometimes you'll get the paint as a whole is fine. The paint that's in the bottom of the bottle is fine, and stuff gets stuck in that dropper tip and starts to dry out. So you get it out of there, you put it back in the main mass, you maybe add a little water, you stir. You have to stir. Even I have a vortex mixer and I still stir. So here I have been bad and not left all the black in between my plates. So I will replace that later with lining. That is another way to learn brush control, is to paint like you, if you painted that whole area black or you primed it, and then you use the brush control to leave those little lines in between. That builds brush control. And then the other way also builds brush control, which is doing the lining later. So lining is beneficial in two ways: in making your miniatures read more easily on the tabletop and building your brush control. He's not staying in focus today, is he? And I suspect that is one of the reasons people don't like it, because it is hard to do. And I understand that. But if I could go back in time and tell myself, okay, here's how you should learn miniature painting, I would emphasize brush control instead of specific techniques. And definitely instead of as much focus as I put on blending. Not that blending isn't as important, but I put way too much emphasis on blending. Yeah, so get a stir stick for your paints. Eat to Surf. In fact, I bet Quindy will be helpful and find the article. But I have an article on my site, How to Maintain Paints. It shows the common issues that you will find with paints and talks about how to maintain them and should you add anything other than water. And a lot of the common questions people have about how do they maintain their paints or kind of rescue paints that are having problems. it is something I'm a believer of doing. I mean, I have paints from I don't remember exactly when Reaper released the first set of MSP's paints, but I'm gonna guess like 2004, 2005, because I know I was working at a game store then. And in fact, so I got the first release at the game store, but then the second one, they kept not ordering it in, and I was so impatient that I eventually ordered them online, even though I got a 30% discount from work. And I think that's the only gamery thing that I could have got through the store. Sometimes our store just wouldn't get stuff in, and I might have to order it somewhere else. But I think that was the only thing where I couldn't get it somewhere else, where I could have gotten that at work, but I got it somewhere else because I was so impatient. But anyway, the actual crux of my story there is that I know that some of my paints are that old because they have the price stickers from the store on them. I remember what the price stickers look like. And they're still on my shelf and they're still usable because I have done this paint maintenance thing every few years. This time is probably the longest that I've gone from once I started doing it. I don't think I did that right from the beginning. I don't think I realized it first. But once I started understanding that as much of a pain in the butt as it is, and it is, it's the messiest job in painting, that's for sure. You definitely want to have lots of napkins, wear old clothes, put newspaper or something down on the table that you're doing it on if you care about it. That kind of thing. But that stuff's in the article too, some of that advice. There are paints I probably wouldn't bother with trying to rescue. But certainly frozen paint. There's no way back from frozen paint. And there is an example of frozen paint in that article. Because if regular viewers here may recall the time that I got a cottage cheesy frozen paint. But what was interesting is there were actually more than a dozen paints in the order that I got that one in. And that was the only one that was affected. Because once I noticed that, I went through all the paints and I'm like, okay, are any others of these a problem? Do I have to, reorder some paint? So it's not like guaranteed to happen. But if it does happen, unfortunately, it's not like when paint is clumped up at the bottom of the bottle like you're talking about with your metallics. It's like the paint chemistry is actually changed. So it's not just that the pigment is separated out. It's that the acrylic polymers have gone wonky. I'm sure there's a more technical term for that. So I'm using blue liner to add shading to the armor plates. So this is shaded metallics because that's a matte colored paint, so that I can control where the shadows are by making things less reflective there. I believe back in the day, I don't know if she still does call it this, but Anne used to call it demi-metallics. And she did it a slightly different way, which I actually think is interesting and I should try, but maybe we'll do it on the sword. I think these little parts are too small. Plus, I've already repainted that part of it. So I don't think it's worth going back and doing that. But I can try to remember to do it on the sword or the edges of a shield or something. And I started off with fairly thin blue liner. And now I'm using less thinned for the deeper crevices. And this is something that would be more effective to show you on larger armor plates, but this is what this guy has. The town can't afford to get him plate mail. Come on. He's just a schmo. I'm buying plate mail for the schmo. And now I'm going to do that lining thing on the rivets. So this is the same way I did it last week before anyone was in here. Instead of trying to paint a little line around a tiny circle, I'm painting the entire circle. So now it is not metallic, but I will fix that in a moment. And if I don't completely cover up the top, that is fine, because I do want the top to look like metal. I'm just accepting that to get there, I need to do this. I'm not saying this is the only way to do this, but I find this a helpful way to do this. There are also some little tiny rivets. And this is another thing that I would say is probably pretty good for practicing brush control. If you find something that's got a whole mess of rivets, do this part, and then the next part that I'm about to show you, there are no rivets on the back. And I think it will help. Because sketchbooks were mentioned. Surf, I think, mentioned sketchbooks, and that is one of the things. So I've been studying traditional art for 6 years now, and that is one of the things that traditional artists will do a bit differently than miniature painters often do. So someone who's trying to learn to do portraits might have a sketchbook where they just do pages and pages of noses. And they don't do the whole face. They don't do a finished drawing or a finished painting. They just do noses until they crack how to do noses. Or hands. Hands are a big one that everybody who draws hates. So it's not unusual for someone to fill a sketchbook where it's just hands in different positions. We don't do that. We always want to have a finished figure for our effort. And that slows down our learning. So either finding miniatures where you can do the techniques you need to practice or the things that would do brush control, or just finding ways to practice, 5 or 10 minutes every time you paint. Just do some brush control exercises. I think you would probably advance so much faster than those of us who just paint a mini and then paint another mini, and you're trying to solve all the problems at once. But if you pick a couple things to focus on and try to improve and practice those a bunch. I was watching a video, and I probably should have written down the link because I think it was a very good video. I'm going to add it to my article about painting for contests and critique and stuff, because she was talking about it's Lila Mev, the mini witch, I think is her name on YouTube. And she was talking about, 4 things that hold you back from improving your painting. And so sometimes she'll just, if she's trying to learn something like wet blending or layering or some other smooth blending technique, she just practices, she primes bases and then just practices it on that flat surface of the base until she feels comfortable with it. And that may feel like a waste of time because you're not getting a mini out of it, but that practice is so much more focused that you will actually get better faster doing a bit of that and then working on your miniature for the day than just trying to learn everything on figures. So that is one of the things I would go back in time and tell myself, I think. All right, that's enough messing with that. Let's compare him to the other one. I suspect they're pretty similar. He may look a little brighter because I think I was trying to get a little more metallic on him, but he may not. Oh, but I didn't put highlights on him. That's the problem. So I have the blade steel, but just as I like to do highlights with regular materials, I like to do highlights on my metallics. So the lighter colors that are included in the Learn to Paint kits are filigree silver and polished silver. And if I were being really... if I was painting something that I was going to put a lot of effort into, I would do both of these. I would do some highlights with this and then do little spot highlights with this, and maybe I would do that for the sword. But I'm just going to jump straight to the polished silver right now. And sometimes I would thin this down because you can see, you know, like how you get layering, transition stuff that you can see with matte colors. You can get those with metal colors where you can see where you put the highlights. It'll be interesting because you won't be able to see it from every angle because of the shininess. But you'll notice sometimes you go, ah, that looks really... Like this thing, this guy, where did he go? So mostly it looks fine when I turn this sword around, but there are angles where I can see where the darker shadow, like there, I think that one, it shows like a goof that isn't obvious at other angles. That seems more obvious to my naked eye than it does on the video, which is funny because the video is usually really good at magnifying all of my blending transitions for you guys. It is my dream to get a better camera, but I suspect that is a big jump up both in cost and in pain in the butt factor. For someone who's non-technical, I guess I should say. So my husband's technical, but he doesn't do like AV stuff at all. Like he does code and it's like setting up machines and stuff like that. He's good at solving those kind of problems. But the camera isn't focusing, or this is happening or that is happening. He has not been very helpful with those things. Alas, he tries. He has to look it up as much as I would have to look it up, which turns out to be the secret of computer stuff is Google. Well, and they have their own places where they look stuff up too. Stack something or other. I don't remember it all. All right. Now I think I'm at the point where the blue cloth is the most sensible thing to address. And maybe we'll give each of them a different blue cloth. So I don't feel like I want to use the exact same colors as this guy. I'm just trying to paint in the spirit of the color scheme. So this blue seems pretty similar to the dragon blue that's in the Learn to Paint kit, if not weirdly identical. So I'm going to use that for at least one of these guys, but we have some other blues in the kit, so I'm debating whether to mix it up a little on the second guy. I swear there was another blue again. Hold on. Looking. Yeah, there's void blue, which is probably too bright. It doesn't look like it because it's a dark color. But I bet if we did our little test, I would find that this is a very intense color that's going to look weird on the... going with that dragon blue. But we will have a look and find out. Quindy, who is continuing to be super wonderful. My early episodes are renumbered to their proper numbers. The playlist is in the proper order. There's nothing I can do about those 2 videos that got corrupted in the teens, but otherwise everything should be good to go. But if they're part 1 and part 2 of the same number, then that's fixing it as far as I'm concerned. You are certainly not responsible for Twitch being twitchy. I probably didn't need 3 of those, but... And this is something else that, is the kind of thing that I think sometimes people who are like, I want to get miniatures done and on the table, feel like is a waste of time. But choosing colors, and this is every bit as much as true for tabletop miniatures, army miniatures, as it is for, let me put a little bit of that over there, for fancy display pieces that you're going to spend a ton of time on. The color's kind of the most important part. Okay, clearly that one is not as mixed as I'd hoped, because I think that is watery stuff. And that's the kind of thing, that's the other kind of thing that will happen with the lid. Well, maybe not. I'm going to shake it again and Let's see what it looks like if we just spend some more, because these are brand new prints. Casmania wants to know if Quindy is a real wizard, and she is, but we're sworn to secrecy. I don't think it's wildly different. We'll go with that. So I don't do this every time I paint, but probably the times when I do it, the miniatures are better than the times when I don't. All right, so partly I'm picking a shadow color. So we have learned that Storm Chaser Blue is not powerful. And I don't know if I love that or not. It really kind of dulls down the dragon blue. Now this color, I believe, is more intense, so I bet we're not going to have that same. Yeah, you see how it stays a more vivid blue. And that is because even though this looks super dark, if you start to thin it out, you can see how bright it is. And we'll compare that to the Storm Chaser Blue. Which is still a little more vivid than you might have imagined, but less vivid than that one. But I bet the Storm Chaser Blue, which I think is actually here on this one, is going to look like the nice shadow for this Heather Blue. I believe it's, yeah, Heather Blue. That is a more desaturated color. So using a vivid blue in the shadows of this would end up looking weird because it's going to be more saturated in the shadows, and that's going to make the shadows come forward, which is the opposite of what you want to have happening with shadows. So even on camera, this looks pretty good to me. But I would say that the Storm Chaser goes with the Heather Blue and the Void Blue goes with the Dragon Blue better. So I can paint one of each on our fellows. We all know that I'm going to put something on that if I'm not careful. Quindy continues that everything that's there should be numbered appropriately, and I can feel free to let her know if I notice anything else or whatever. Thank you so much. I wasn't trying to guilt you into doing that. I appreciate that you did so much. And then Valander says, the truth is Quindy has a secret backroom deal with a tribe of kobolds working on outdated MacBooks and dial-up internet. But Quindy disagrees because she gives her kobolds the finest technology. I mean, if you want good work out of your people, you got to give them good tools, right? Your people or your kobolds. All right, so I will do the, well, do we paint? No, we're not going to paint up from the darkest color because that's not how I painted the original guy. So I will do the Dragon Blue on one guy and the Heather Blue on the other guy. Let's see who gets what. I think the orangier skin person is going to get the brighter blue. And my Dragon Blue looks a little clumpy. I wonder if it has done that thing. I'm going to take a look just because it would be useful for you guys to see. Oops. Even though I like this shirt. And I'm hopeful that I won't get paint all over it. This is my Reapercon shirt from last year, so it's piratey. I played a pirate board game last night, so I thought it would be appropriate. So it's not really gunked up in there, but it did look like some paint was stuck in the neck of the bottle. I'm drying it a little bit. Or thickening up a little. I mean, same thing, I guess, really. So I probably need to add a little bit of water to the entire bottle, which I will do on my own time and not bug you guys with. And it's just funny how some bottles thicken up way faster than others, and I have no idea if there's a rhyme or reason to that. But I will use this actually as an opportunity to talk about the right consistency for base coats, because I know consistency is a thorny question for people. And most of my paints aren't too thick, so I don't get to show this that often. So how do I decide what the right consistency for a base coat is? Because I've talked a lot about washes, but I haven't talked about that much about base coats. So if I do that, and imagine my brush is a boat, I want the wake to fill in behind the boat. Oops. Well, don't take the whole bristle off. I want the wake to fill in behind the boat as soon as possible. So this one isn't dire, like it's not so thick that it would probably leave a lot of texture, but it's a little bit thick. And we'll compare it to, let's see what the, yeah, you see how you barely even see the wake on the Heather Blue, which is the newer paint, because I just got it recently. So that's what I want for a base coat. I want, if I paint a brush stroke, I'm not going to see bristles. If I draw the brush through the paint, I'm not going to see ridges, even if it's just for a few seconds, which is what's happening. But you can see how it's slower to fill in on the brighter blue. So that is how I know that needs some water. Now, this is going to be one of those areas where those of you who watch Anne know that she puts a lot more. I mean, I think she does like 4 drops of paint and 1 drop of water to make a base coat. And she puts more water in her layers and her washes. Probably not her glazes, because I do water down a glaze. But I think even though we paint in very similar ways overall, we differ a fair amount on paint thickness, which is interesting, I think, and demonstrates that there is definitely more than one way to do things. So here we're going to be able to compare putting this bright blue over the black, where I can definitely see some little streaks, versus over the gray, but it's not going to coat in one coat on any primer color or surface color. Like, very few Reaper paints are one coat paints. I'm not even sure how many paints in other companies. And if they are, like, paints that are one coat are probably not vivid colors. Because the way you get paints to be less opaque is to add white, black, or gray to them. Maybe I need a bigger brush for this part. Because, yeah, where I don't have to be careful, I'm a slap it on person. Slap it on and fix it later. So you can see why it took me a while to develop brush control, because I had what is perhaps not a great philosophy. But I like to be honest and show people that, because I know when I first started posting stuff that was like really nicely painted and whatever, or I know that Jennifer Haley gets questions like this too. Even people assume that you've painted the entire miniature very precisely and delicately. Oh, why am I painting the top of his boot? When it's like, as long as it looks precise and delicate by the end, that is all I want. I don't really care how I get there. I don't care if I got some paint, I got some black paint. Look at that. Who cares? I haven't painted that part yet. And you can see that I haven't thinned it down so much that it's going to do the hydrophobic thing on bones, which is the other reason I do it that way. If you're painting, a fine resin miniature and you want to thin a little more to make sure you're not filling in detail, okay. But for the bones, if you want to paint directly on the bone surface of Bones Black or Original, you have to have, you can't have too much water in your paint or it will just reject it. I'm thinking like I need to put something on the sword. The original guy, or the shield. The original guy doesn't have anything on the shield. But I have not figured out what I should put on the shield. So Velander said that Thwack Belly Scale said they're still on 10.8 max. And Beguiler said that she also has special courier jackalopes for interdepartmental messages. And Quindy is very kind and said I did not guilt her into redoing the time or the episode numbers on my streams. And now I will go after the show and update my Excel spreadsheet or equivalent. And then I will try to keep a copy here so that when I get questions of something that was covered in more detail on another episode than I can do at the moment, I can point people to it. It's interesting. Oh, I got silver. I thought for a minute I thought it was gray, but I got silver on his little thumb, so I'll have to fix that at some point. Because yes, making mistakes is absolutely a thing that I do all of the time. A lot of display painting, or high-level painting, or fancy painting, whatever you want to call it, is just your level of willingness to go back and fix things until very few things need fixing anymore. That needs black in the crevices that I'm not going to reach later. I think that was actually blue liner. I very rarely use black. If I'm painting black, I'll use black. Which not everybody does. So a lot of people who do that kind of, contest display painting like to use chromatic blacks, which is where you mix or use a paint that's already mixed. That's dark, but it's not actually black. And I use other colors in painting black, but I start with black. Sometimes I like to be obvious. So I'm also noticing that I did not line between the shirt and the hands. So I'm going to do that real quick before I... So this is one way I handle lining is I'm not worrying if I get the lining stuff on the shirt because I'm just painting that now. Ideally, I would have done this before I started painting it. So I'm going to lean the brush down towards the shirt so that I'm making a nice perfect line where the skin is and not caring if the line is a nightmare on the other side. And the same here. I mixed that skin color, so it's going to be fun to fix that boo-boo, but not impossible. The boo-boos like that are often easier to fix than you might think. Because it doesn't have to, as long as the value is pretty close, if I don't get the color exactly right, it's not going to matter. All right, so that's going to need a second coat, but that can sit while I work on Mr. Heather Blue. So I guess he'll be the worn, grizzled veteran. And the other guy will be the fresh young recruit with a brand new uniform. And I did not paint the underside of his shirt, jerkin, whatever it is. And that is someplace that's going to be hard to reach later. So I do want to do that before I do clean, neat things. So I'm going to mention the one upside of, you know how you get that hook in your brush. You can see a little hook. it's great for getting under hems, under cloaks. Like this guy right here has a better example. It would be hard to get up in there with a straight brush, but if you aim that little hook up and you've got a big glob of paint under there, you can get under there pretty easily. So even though I don't love synthetic brushes for a lot of things, I do always like to have one brush with a good hook. And the hook doesn't always get made exactly correct. So I've had times when I was sadly without a hooky brush, and I was sad. Quindy is sad that the secret of the jackalopes is out. Slap some. Oh, I did the same thing where I didn't give him his lines. So let's do that real quick. This is more how I would do it before I'd started anything on the shirt. I would be fixing this up. I mean, if I have to, I can come in there and be more precise. This just is so much better for my blood pressure, though. Oh, and I totally forgot the cool spot of blue on this guy that is around his face, which also needs the lining. Because this lining is going to be some of what makes the biggest difference between original and crispy recipe here. That's going to make it super fun if I try to fix the eyes later, but hey. Maybe I just won't try to fix the eyes later. So that is, I think I saw something about this on the Reaper Facebook page, like yesterday or the day before, where somebody was painting. Who were they painting? Might have been Madame Delia, but they were like frustrated. They were like, "How do you paint eyes when the eyes are sculpted like pretty small?" Like as if the eyes are like half closed or they're squinting or something like that. And then sometimes, some sculptors, the more proportionally a figure is sculpted, the smaller the eyes are going to be. Because if you look at people from the same distance away that they would need to be the size of a figure, you will discover that the eyes look very small. And some people's answer was, well, just darken them because, if someone was that far away, you wouldn't be able to see their eyes, which is 100% true. And how a lot of people handle it for armies, or I think in the historical painting side of the hobby, they are much more going for that kind of realism, I guess. And they typically would not paint the eyes on this scale of figure. So they're going to paint them like on a 75 millimeter or, a bust or whatever, because you can see them at that scale. But they often just shadow the crevices for this scale of figure. And if you're painting to get stuff on the table, I think that's a perfectly fine answer if they don't have giant sculpted eyes, or even if you don't want to take the time to do it. I think that is a fine answer. So I might leave him like that. I mean, I did paint the eyes on the first one that I painted, so it seems like it behooves me to paint eyes on these revised ones. But I don't know yet. If I do, I will use the same trick that I shared with the person on the Facebook page, which is I paint the eyes looking off to the side. So you can paint just paint dark over the whole eye, and then you just try to dot a little bit of white in the corners. And leave the rim dark, and then leave the part that's the pupil dark. Pupil plus iris. Oh, and shield. I don't think I saw any suggestions for what I could paint on a shield. I have a book of heraldry somewhere. Although now I'm thinking about it, that might be one of the fabled Lost in the Flood books. But I will take a look in case it is not, because there's some interesting stuff in there. Oh, now I forgot his hood. Thingamabobber. Because that was the whole point of giving one of them orangey skin, was that they would have this blue near their skin, and it should make for nice contrast. It would put a little bit more focus on the face than the original figure had. And there is a cat hair or something. You might paint. I'm actually surprised that Ella hasn't come to say hello to you. Because, so I live in Tennessee, and it's been pretty warm the past week or two. Like, not as warm as it's going to get, but I know that, some of my Facebook friends are still posting pictures of snow. They live in Colorado or other places that can have more variable weather. But that's not what's been happening here. And Ella is, we call her Sad Southern Kitty in the winter, because she literally hugs heat vents. Like, she'll just sleep beside a heat vent, and she's like all up on it. So she's been very happy because the sun is back. So she can go out on her back porch that's screened in, and we put up a couple of cat shelves where they can sit and look out the screen, and she just melts. She just sits in the sun and melts. And she's been deliriously happy about this. But today it is raining and not warm. And she keeps coming to tell me about how this sucks and should be fixed. Because my cats refuse to believe that we have no control over the weather. So I thought she would come and see you guys today and ask for pets, because she's very sad about the not great weather. So the holder doesn't fix everything. You may see that I have some blue here, and that this shield has less blue, because I did not paint things in the correct order. Slap a little more on there. I should not be messing with wet and slightly dry paint. So it says paint a jackalope on it. That seems tricky, but maybe I'll look up what a jackalope would look like in like silhouette or something. It has to be something you can paint in silhouette. Beguiler is reminding us that Reaper makes jackalope minis in case anyone needs one of those in their lives. Which I would say that we all need some of those in our lives. Do I have any of them? If I have any of them, I could, put some little jackalopes on their bases. I will have to go look. I am obsessed with familiars, so it's very likely that I have some. I think some of you probably heard this story before, because I was showing the difference in and I have no idea what episode this is, and there is not a blog post to point you at, but just before, it was sometime during the Kickstarter campaign, before I went to Reaper for that party, but I had the original, white bones familiars, and then I had the metal ones that were like the very original versions of those, and I had some of the new Bones USA ones that released, because several familiar packs just released in Bones USA. And I was comparing the detail and the size and the overall quality. Because interestingly, The Bones Classic versions are actually smaller than the original sculpts were. And the Bones USA are based on the original sculpts, so they are larger. So Bones USA is such a nice step up for detail, and I was very excited to see the familiars in it, because I think adding familiars to bases, or I've done a couple of swaps where I've stuck a bird on somebody's staff or something like that. I think that's a great way to add interest to like scenes, and even just bases for single figures. And you'll often have games where somebody's got such and such as their animal companion or familiar, and the packs allow you to customize to a great many different. There's even one. Now, I don't think this one is out in Bones USA yet, at least. But there's one that's sea creatures. So if you had underwater campaign, or characters that can go underwater, they are still set up for familiar having. But back in the day when I worked at the game store, and even for a little while after I didn't work at the game store is no longer there, but I did continue to shop there after I stopped working there. I just didn't want to work there anymore. I think Black Friday, my second Black Friday broke me. No, I'm kidding. I mean, it is bad. I'm Canadian. We don't have that. I was not mentally prepared for the adventure that is Black Friday at the mall. And we had like really slow software. And we used a modem at the time. I mean, this is far enough back. This is like 2003, 2005, I think, is when I worked there. Um, so we had a modem that is what the credit card machine used to verify purchases. There was some kind of machine involved. Anyway, so, and we just had one phone line. Um, so if we got a phone call, we could not process transactions. So we did not love when people called us on Black Friday. Because it'd be like, ma'am, I really want to help you, but you are holding up a line of like 12 people. Please go away. Because I did have that happen one Black Friday. Somebody called up and they're like, "What's that game where you're like kind of guessing the things?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" I think I did eventually figure it out, and I'm like, "We don't have it. We're not getting in. I have to get you off the phone because I can't process credit card transactions." She's like, "You're so rude," and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm being rude to a bunch of other people talking to you." Although that was, I think my favorite, you kind of suck as a customer, was this couple came in, and they're like walking around the store. They're the only people there. It's almost closing. And she's like, and this was, so again, this is like 2005. She's like, "Oh, I bought this on Amazon." And then she comes over and asks me to explain how to play it. And I'm like, I was very polite. I was still more Canadian then than I am now. But I'm basically like, no. And she's like, "Well, you're rude. I'm going to tell your manager." And I'm like, "Go ahead, because I'm pretty sure he's okay with me not telling you how to play something you bought somewhere else." Which he 100% would have been. Well, okay, I don't know if my manager would have been, but the store owner would absolutely have been like, "Do not waste time with these people." And hey, I don't mind if they bought stuff at Amazon. I'm not saying I've never bought stuff at Amazon. I'm just saying, like, don't be tacky about it. Let's see. Beguiler will be ordering some jackalopes in the next order. Kurniko, one of our cats, is also convinced that I control the weather and complains bitterly if the sun isn't shining on her favorite sleeping pod every day. Yeah, the other cat is very, because he doesn't want to go out if it's raining, so we get to hear from him a lot too. And it's like, dude, we do not fix this. Oh, Quindy has a link to the Jackalope Pack, which has two in it. And so there was some discussion about whether that's a pack, and then the advice is just buy 2 packs, and then you do have a pack of jackalopes, as well as 2 packs of miniatures. But yes, I mean, how can you have enough jackalopes? But our store would have a buy one, get one free sale a couple of times a year, which, was pretty amazing. And I would just always buy whatever familiar packs were in stock, and we stocked a lot of Reaper stuff. I would just buy. I'm like, you can't have enough familiars. There's no such thing as enough familiars. So I have somewhere, and the people who were here for the episode where I was looking at the familiars got to see some of my bags full of familiars sorted by, I have like a bag of cats, a bag of, canids, a bag of, I think I have a bag of monkey type familiars, and they're not all from Reaper, right? Whatever old miniatures that my husband had or that friends had that had familiars in, I'm like, well, no, I'm definitely keeping all of these. So I've got little tiny Walpertha familiars and mystery things. I have no idea where they came from, familiars. One of the more interesting Reaper familiar packs is actually in War. I don't know if they still divide things up by Warlord. I think they do. But they're not typical animals. They're like, little fairies or demons or constructs. And so they're pretty cool. There's like a doll with a knife, I think is more. That might be in the Halloween pack, I'm not sure. But there's just some interesting, weird little guys in that one. Not that I don't love the, natural animals, because I absolutely do. But sometimes the character that you need a companion for is not, your standard character, and they might need something super weird. Hello, Ultra Squid. I don't know if we've had people join us. It does seem like people come in and out of Twitch streams, so I will just quickly explain what I'm doing. This is the first miniature I ever completed, which was from the Reaper's original series of Learn to Paint kits. And I think there's a variety of reasons to repaint miniatures you've already painted, but one of them is it can be interesting to paint something you painted a long time ago to see where your skills have gone. So I'm playing around a bit with altering the colors and using different techniques and things like that from what was done, me following the original Learn to Paint instructions. Which, I forgot to go look and see if I still had, if I could find the instructions, which, I know I have them, but they might be somewhere where I don't know where they are, but I did have a place to guess where they were, and I forgot to look in that place before the show today. Where are we time-wise? Because I do just want to remind everybody about something I mentioned last week. So I might briefly switch to photos once I get this completed enough to dry. I know, I'm just like the slowest at base coats ever. Believe me, it is torture for me too. If I could hire a minion, it would be to do base coats. I mean, assuming I had someone cleaning my house already, which was definitely what I would hire a minion to do before that. Because I hate cleaning the house and I'm bad at it. But if I could hire a paintwork minion, it would be to do this. But alas, there is only me, so we must all suffer through watching me take forever to do this. This is probably one of those areas where I can make other people feel better about themselves. Because you're like, I would have got all the paint on this miniature in 20 minutes. Possibly why I don't thin down, because it already takes me so long. How could we bear it if it took even longer? Because if it were just me painting on my own, I would actually give each of these 3 coats based on how the paint, you know, how I feel like I'm seeing things underneath, and I like a really opaque base coat, but we're not going to do that so that you don't have to watch me do this for the rest of our lives. And I suspect it will work out fine between this shadow, doing the shading and the highlighting. I think it will work out. There was just a little bit of hydrophobia right there. It's funny how sometimes it's not the whole mini, it's just one part. But I had forgotten to do his legs previously, so we won't be returning to him. But in the meantime, if you give me a minute, I'm going to switch over to my slideshow. And nope, that's not my slideshow. There we go. I have to click something. So let's, hold on a minute. It is, it goes to autoplay. So I'll go through these real quick. But I was also showing people last week how photography has moved on since back in the day. So this wasn't even my first camera. I think this was the second camera that I had that I took pictures of my first guy with. And then it's the same guy. I haven't done any repainting or anything. This is all just differences in photography. And then that's another camera again. And all of these cameras are from before 2008 because I did still forget to go take a new picture of him with my current camera. This was my third guy, which I know I have very small display cases. And there was a time a few years ago where I packed some things away. And I think he was one of the ones that got packed away. So if I figure out where that is, I will show him because he's just so terrible that I think he's worth showing. And this is, you saw this little short man earlier, but this is more of the power of photography and how well cameras improved as my painting was improving. This was the figure from the second Learn to Paint kit in Reaper's original series. And I've been thinking I should do her again too, because I would definitely do some stuff different there. Oh, and it's not there. Dang it, it was on my phone. Okay, I apologize for this unnecessary interlude. I will look on my phone for the picture I'm thinking of, but you can look at this one in the meantime. So this is Kobzar Solo Vaco, which I believe Reaper is still selling these. That $7.50 from every one sold is donated to UNICEF for Ukraine relief for children. So he's already, and Jason Wiebe sculpted this using lots of symbols from the Ukraine, and named him as well, I think. But I then painted one. I painted 2. Talking of painting figures over again, I painted that figure over again. But here we'll look on my phone. But this is the one that I painted, also inspired by Ukrainian things. So this is the Nightingale that's called Blue Throat that actually occurs in multiple parts of Europe, but is found in Ukraine. And I painted this on stream, so if you're interested, you can watch the streaming process. I tightened it up and did a few little parts after. There's another example of the difference of photography, because I think the colors come out looking different on a black background and a blue background. But if you're interested in how I painted this, including the colors that I used, you want to know more about Jason's inspiration in sculpting, my current blog post is about this guy. But the reason I'm pimping this is not for my own benefit. It is for charity, because you could win this miniature, and you could also win one each of the paints that I painted it with, which if you were here while I was doing it, was a buttload. I think it's 30 some paints. You also would win a blister miniature. So the miniature in the blister, and the blister signed by Jason Wiebe, plus an hour of time with me I can video if you want, email if you want, where I can show you stuff, or you can show me your miniatures, and I can give you some feedback on things you can improve. We'd talk in advance and figure out what you want to know, so I could be prepped up and ready to do it. But if Kobzar doesn't look interesting to you, there are like 50 other things up for auction. So there are busts, there are, if you play Games Workshop games, there are figures for your game. Aaron Corporia put in a painting, like a 2D painting with a girl in a field of sunflowers. That's really pretty. And then the big prize, and how this all started, is somebody got like all the Marvel United stuff, so the board game and all the expansions and all of that. And then some of the best painters in the world painted 52 out of 84 of the figures. And they're really pretty amazing. So there should be something there to appeal to you. And I suggest you go check it out if you're interested in helping people in the Ukraine. I think that one goes to... interestingly, it's also called Nova, Nova Ukraine. But I think there's no relation between the Nova Charities and the Nova Ukraine. Nova Charities is a miniature-related thing. There's a Nova convention, and they've been doing charity auctions, I think, twice a year. Not charity raffles. Charity raffles twice a year for a while now. And this is kind of like a special one this year, because it sort of fell in between when they do their raffles. So I guess they're doing 3 this year. So this is not stuff that's taking away from their normal summer raffle. And their normal charities are Fisher House, Breast Cancer Research, and Doctors Without Borders. And I'm pretty sure Tish Walter is working on something for that, for the next summer raffle that they have. She's another painter who does Reaper stuff, or that you may know from ReaperCon, is why I mention her, for those who don't know who I'm talking about. As is Corporia. Although, if you hang out here, you've probably seen Corporia in chat, if you hang out on the Reaper channels at all. Because she comes to lots of the streams. She could even be lurking right now. I don't know. She does show up now and then for my stream. Now the shield as a big flat surface is gonna, I think you can kind of see the gray through there. Let's see how his shield is looking. So this blue, I guess, is just a little more opaque. But this one's gonna need another coat for sure. So big flat surfaces, it's not weird if you find that you need more coats of paint on something like that, just because there's no texture or folds or curves or anything breaking stuff up, so our eyes are going to see flaws in something like that a lot better. Which if you were here when I was talking about how Lila Mev, who has a YouTube channel about painting, was talking about how she practices on the flat surfaces of bases. That's probably a pretty good surface to practice on, because there's no hiding. You know, if you're practicing something like blending, there's no hiding what's going on. And I've used bases for practicing freehand, because it's painting on a piece of paper is a totally different experience. Like, paper's a porous surface, so even if you're using your same brush and your same paint, that's a totally different experience than painting on a non-porous miniature or something like that. So I will like do a coat of paint on a base and then practice freehand trying to get the size, and then move on to something where the shape is a little more whatever. So I feel like I should paint his skin. And this original guy is very pale. If you compare him to how I painted. In fact, we might even say pasty. This guy has not seen the sun in a while. He's sadder than my cat. So I want to paint him pale, but not like needs to see a doctor pale. So I have scholar flesh and Caucasian flesh. That seems weird, but okay. What else do I have over here? I have dark highlights. Yeah, maybe I'll use that. So I'm just reaching for paints that I have from the kits and the expansions. Gamer tan. Yeah, I'm concerned about that guy's health. It's not good. Which do I like better? These seem very similar. Like, so similar, I wonder if something's misnamed. But I'll go with this one. And even though he's pasty, I think shadows are important. I wrote a blog post a while back about shading and how shading light skin is an important thing to do. And then there was a companion post about how highlighting dark skin is an important thing to do to paint a good face. This is so much lighter than I would ever start painting skin. I typically start, my base coat's a little darker than some people would. And I think for the faces that I painted last week, I believe I started with the darkest color instead of doing shading and stuff. But to make sure that this guy stays pale, I'm going to start with the pale. And then try to pop the bubbles. Now, if I were wanting to make my life easier, I would paint his hands as being gauntleted. But since there's so little skin showing on him, and since the original one that I painted way back in the day, nope, that's not him, had bare hands. Oh my gosh, that's even pastier looking than his face, I think. He is unwell. Oh, and there are still tiny bubbles. Sir Pasty McPaleface needs to get outside for a few minutes. Indeed. Even I get more sun than that, and I get very little sun. I use the magic of science for vitamin D. And lots of it. Oh, just to go back to, where did he go? Just go back to this guy for a minute. This one was painted in very different colors because I was using colors that were available, or will be available as part of the Kickstarter 6. So I have these colors now. And I'm going to show them to you guys and probably do swatches and stuff. But I figure I'll wait until the pledge manager is there. So if you see them and you're like, oh, I want to run and put that in my pledge before I forget, you will be able to do that. So I don't want to show you stuff that you can't go get right away, but I will show you those very soon. Quindy points out that some of us burn in the sun or burst into flames even, and she's being questioned as to whether she's a redhead or a vampire. All right. Where are we time-wise? Not at a great time, so I feel like I should not start painting the blue on any of these guys. What could I do instead? What a great question. While I wait for this one's skin to dry, I think his face is the correct answer, so I'm going to turn the hairdryer on just for a minute to speed that up. I'll put this here because someone always comes in when I do the hairdryer. Oh, and now I have to do the mute. And I'm back. Pendrake got sunburn trying to landscape. That sounds painful. Quindy said, I see you trying to get more secrets out of me, Gallery 87, but I'm not revealing to you that I'm a vampire, or else you might not invite me when I ask. This skin is just too pale for me. I cannot handle it. So I'm looking for... I'm not going to make it as bright as Suntan Flesh, but I'm going to mix some of that into the Scholar Flesh, which is now called something else. So a few years back, I experimented with painting very pale skin because it was something that I know a lot of people seem to want to do, and I typically start my skin colors darker, so I don't have a lot of advice for people other than don't do it. No, that's not really advice. But I found that it was super hard for me as, you know, an experienced painter, teacher, Bender the blender, whatever thing you want to use, to get smooth blends if I started off pale like this. If I went just a little darker with the first part, I could highlight up and still get them to, you know, have pretty fair skin. But it was just so much easier than starting out mega pale. So this isn't even, I mean, I don't consider this a huge value difference, although it's amazing. On the palette it looked more. I'll show you on the palette in just a sec. But this is still paler than I would normally start, I think. But it's at least workable to me, I believe. So sometimes you'll just find that there are you can't do things the same way that you see somebody do in a video or that they do in a class. It doesn't mean you can't do that thing. It just means you might need to experiment a little to find the way that you can do it. So it doesn't mean that I can't paint pale skin ever. It just means I need to kind of do it my way. So this is what I mixed. I mixed this one. You can still only see a little bit in. This is how pale it was to start. So it's not like a huge difference, the one I mixed, but it's enough that I feel like it looks more like a skin tone. So I'm gonna do the hairdryer thing again. And I'm back. And this is probably a good time to mention. So, Anne always kind of recommended against a hairdryer, and I merely used a hairdryer anyway for years. But recently, I was watching a video with Golden. They're one of the big art manufacturer people who make acrylic paints, and they also recommended against it with heat at any rate. But drying, if the top surface dries faster than the underlying parts, you can get what they call creasing, which is somehow different than cracking, because they were very specific about it as a term. So I try not to use a hairbrush too much, or a hairdryer too much, but when I do, I use it on the air setting, so that hopefully, it's not speeding the drying up crazy fast. Now, I have honestly not had many problems with crazing on miniatures, but not many is more than none, because I have occasionally had problems. And I think it's most likely to happen when you're doing, fairly thick applications of base coats like what I just did. So it's not going to make a difference, I think, with like very thin applications of washes or glazes or stuff like that. It's less likely to make a difference because how much of a difference is there between the surface of that and there's not enough depth to have a big difference between surface and other parts. But I just thought I would share that for your benefit, because I'm sure I'm not the only person who uses a hairdryer when they get impatient with painting things. Oh, hello, sentimental minis and raiders. Daka Flocka Flame. I struggle with pale skin getting washed out in photos, so all the fun pinks and blues in real life just turn to a chalky looking white. Yeah, subtle stuff in photographs, particularly if you're using a cell phone camera. I find that, they can take much better pictures than even just a few years ago. And they can be surprisingly well in focus and whatnot for miniatures, but they do tend to not do as well. Just like this camera that you're seeing me use, it does not do as well with subtleties of color and whatnot. So camera can make a difference. You can also, just try being less subtle, and see if you like that in real life too. Like, it's possible that you're being more subtle than you need to be. Because we always see, just like how most of us need more contrast, we always see what's going on with our minis way more than anyone else looking at them does, because we're so familiar with them. And we know exactly where to look to see what's going on. Yeah, adding some sort of color back into very pale skin, or not playing around with color, because the other thing that happens, one of the reasons that guy looks unwell, is this: it's just too light to have any color. Like, the more white you add to something, the less saturated the color is. And this is as true of skin tones as anything else. So adding some stuff in, like Dr. Flock Flame was talking about, can help add a lot of visual interest and life to a pale skin tone. I mean, it's great on non-pale skin tones as well. You're just less likely to be having struggles with those. And the parts that are like really shadowed, I'm just going to go ahead and go down to that dark highlights. I think it's too much for in between the fingers now. And now I will go up a little. Because I have some room for highlights now that I started just that little bit darker. I think that's a little little in the sculpt, not the paint. The guy there asks, do I prefer to start a mini going dark to light to dark with your midtones, or does it depend on the mini and your mood? It tends to depend on the color I'm painting or how fast I want to paint the miniature. So going from dark to light is the quickest. May not necessarily be like insanely faster, but it is faster. There's another method that's a little faster, is if you start in the middle and you paint all the highlights on everything, and then you come in and do the shadows, because you can use a lot of the same shadow colors on different things. So you can save a lot of time that way. I didn't enjoy painting that way though, because one of the things I enjoy is moments of transformation, and it was too drawn out that way, I think, is what I didn't like. So it was like the payoff between the work and enjoying what it looked like it was too separated, I guess is what I would say. If what I'm trying to do is be really clear on where to make things dark, like where the shadows should be and where the highlights should be from the light effect, I prefer to start in the middle and then add the dark and then add the light. That to me is the easiest way to visualize where the light and dark should be. The trick with working up from the darkest is you have to remember that a bunch of what shows up should be the midtone. Like there should be more of the midtone than either highlights or shadows. That's what makes it the midtone. That's how people identify that as, okay, this is a darker blue and this is a lighter blue, because there's going to be more dark blue showing than there is the lighter blue, if that makes sense. So in terms of if I'm learning to deal with shadows and highlights and try to paint more realistically, if I'm painting a display miniature that I really want to take a lot of time on, I'm going to want to start with the midtone, add the shadows, and then add the highlights. That's for me. I mean, other people might have different experiences, but I think working out where the light is a tricky thing. So if you're having trouble with that, that is one thing I recommend trying. In terms of color, if I'm painting black, I start with my darkest, I work up to my lightest, and then I go back down, because that's what I have to do to make it smooth and tighten up, and also make it dark. Like if you watch the dark skin painting episodes, that's what I did there, and a lot of it is tightening up those highlights so that you have more of that midtone showing. It won't read as dark if the majority of the surface of the miniature isn't dark. So something won't look like black if you have too many gray or tan or whatever color you're highlighting with, too much of that showing. Even if it's not the brightest color, but just if you have too much of it showing in general, it's not going to look like black. And then white. For a similar reason, I do the opposite. I start at white, and then I work down, and then I usually find that I've taken out too much of the white, and I fix it. So extremes are a little trickier sometimes to work on. Well, I don't know if he's unpasty. We might have to give him some blush or something later. But I think he's healthier than Mr. Original Recipe. I think he looks healthier than this guy at least. So he's very pale. And I didn't even go to white. I think I will go to white just to... But he definitely has, you know, a much lighter skin tone than the first two figures that I worked on. But yes, I will go all the way to white. Well, you know what? I will go with... No, I think it has to be white. I don't normally go all the way to white on skin or just in a few very small spots. I like to use a color like this, yellow mold. It'll depend on the skin tone, but something with a little bit of yellow in it is often something I like to do, or even depending on the color, something like this if I didn't want to have warm highlights, Vampire Pallor. And then having the white just in the very smallest spots, that like the end of the nose, right under here is where I like to have. Yeah, the other two, I was trying to make the eye sockets pretty dark. So I suspect I need to, well, do I need to darken his? I will ponder. I do need to make some of his not skin. So if he had a nose showing, I would be putting this white on the nose, but I'm mainly going to focus under the eye and the brow ridge. His upper lip is sculpted a little weirdly, but occasionally I'll put just a little bit on the chin. I usually don't. I usually keep the white at the very top, you know, the top half of the face. So I'm not putting any on his hands. It's going to draw too much focus. I want the high, and then you get the contrast between the dark rim around the eye or the eye socket in these guys' case. And in fact, they probably need slightly higher highlights. So I can use my light colors. Just come in and do the same thing. Very small areas. For that little extra pop. Here's his friend. I think I went up a little bright on his friend. Oh, didn't get the brow ridge then. This guy didn't get a brow ridge at all, so. 1, 2. Hope that the fact that the original skin tone on this one was much pinker is not going to be noticeable on these tiny, tiny pieces of skin. Which is what I was mentioning earlier, that somebody, yeah, this guy has a bloop on his thumb that I'm going to try to cover up. And again, I am not matching this to the color that I mixed previously because it was mixed. But this one was the pinker guy, I think. One was oranger, one of them was pinker. Yeah, this was the pinker one. And I'm not using a particularly pink skin tone. But it's such a small amount, and if I get the value right, you will probably not notice that. It's going to need another coat because the shininess of the metallic underneath is making it look bright. But I can work on his eye sockets are dry now, I think. not his eye sockets, his brow ridge. Which is another area you can have fun with on male characters and like monster type characters. You can get very expressive with it. I got a little bit of silver on him too. Apparently there's something that I had to reach with the metallic that was challenging for me to reach. And the other reason I wouldn't worry about this is if you look in a mirror and hold your hand up to your hero. I'll do it on the camera. My hand is not the exact same color as my face. My legs probably aren't the exact same color as my arms. Like, we have this thing in miniature painting where everything's supposed to be all the same color, and that's really not how it works all the time in real life. So that's the other reason I wouldn't sweat it. Like, if I had happened to paint their face and said, no, I can't paint the hands until later because of their year or whatever, and I had mixed the paints the same way that I really did for their faces, I wouldn't drive myself nuts about not being able to mix exactly the same, because their hands wouldn't look exactly the same. As long as, both the hands are the same, if I paint both the hands at the same time, that's more important, I think, than if the face and the hands match exactly. If that makes sense. So I'll also tend to, Daka was talking about putting color in skin, and I'll tend to do a lot more of that in a face than other parts of the body. There may be other parts of the body where I'm adding a little red or adding a little purple or something like that in the shadows. But in the skin, I might have red in the cheeks or red on the end of the nose, and then it's a little more yellow on the forehead, and then maybe they have 5 o'clock shadow and there's a little more gray or purple in the shadows around the chin. I would go to that effort on a face. I'm not necessarily going to do that on the whole, like all the skin on the figure, unless skin is the story of the figure. You have somebody that's like a barbarian or something that they have a lot of skin showing. Then I might get a little, but still, the face is supposed to be the focus of the figure, is where you should be putting the most effort and breaking out the fancy techniques. Pendrake is a fan of gloves for 28mm figures. This guy, I think I would, if I hadn't painted the original as having bare hands, I would have painted gloves, because that's probably not going to be the only time I get paint on those hands, just painting the metallics, because I bet when we try to do something with the shield, I'll get paint on those hands. But we'll see. So I think we're at time. Thank you all for joining me. I'm sure Quindy's going to find us a raid of someone who's doing something fun and possibly miniature related, but fun either way. And I guess I'll see you next week. And hopefully we'll get a little more fun parts. I'll get to painting more of the, work on some cloth stuff and maybe get into the non-metallic metal on the other thing. Oh, you're all welcome. Thank you, Kiriniko and Beguiler, and Quindy and Anki 2014. Anki 2014? I don't know how you say it. Quindy is finding something fun, so I don't think she found something mini related. So now it's a mystery. Now I'm eagerly awaiting to see what we go to. But thank you all for showing up. I appreciate the chance to get to hang out with you, and I hope you had fun, and I'll see you next week. I'm going to put my closing screen on now.